Is it audible? Madam, is it audible?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Yes,
sir. It is audible,
yes,
sir.
yes, yes.
Yes, sir. It is very clear.
Okay, madam. Good morning to Professor Bharati, Professor Y.S. Sarada, Professor Haripadma, Professor Sheila, Professor Neeraja, and all the members of the department and participants from various places. Now, I just don't want to reflect on just Corona, which is very much familiar to many of us, and we are living with that. But I would like to trace out the roots for this calamity. And at the same time, I will blame it on the total modernist project which made this thing possible, or which resulted in this kind of calamity or holocaust, whatever the word we use, and its consequences to literature. A little bit of literature has already been produced, even in India. A lot of poetry has been written, and some stories are written. And in the West, not less than 10 films are made. So in that way, it has been a topos or content or theme for cultural expressions, including literature. So normally, literature always deals with uncommon themes. When literature deals with mundane and routine things, that won't attract our attention. In fact, literature has to problematize the issues that are pestering, the issues that are complicated, the issues that are very, very ambiguous in nature, must be the source for literature. And if you have even a cursory look at the great literature, you will find they contain a lot of uncommon themes. For example, you take Anna Karenina. It is so unconventional and uncommon. A woman, by having everything she needed financially, lacks something emotionally. For that, she goes to the extent of leading a libertine kind of a life. And if you take even a long, what you call novel or not novel, a collection of stories like Decameron, written sometime in 13th or 12th century, you find so many unconventional themes that made the work very, very interesting. To cite one example, there is a character which questions and challenges the existing moral paradigms or existing the moral fabric. She asks straightforwardly one question. When I distribute my property, everybody is happy. When I distribute the things I have or the possessions I have, everybody appreciated me. When I distributed my love, everybody found fault with me and called me adulterous and booked me in a case. So a character in 12th century challenging the moral fabric of the society, yet unimaginable, but that is the content which made the work interesting, or a work that had problematized a contemporary issue. So likewise, Madame Bovary, you see, it is so unconventional and uncommon theme, where a woman, in spite of having everything she wanted, she was not happy because there is some kind of emotional disturbance and discontent. And for that she goes to the extent of breaking all the social mores and norms. That made the novel one of the interesting things. And even a novel like Crime and Punishment, with which we are all familiar. In one of the contests, Raskolnikov asked a question. I have killed 2 women. So legally it is not correct. A man has no right to take the life of another man. So you have to punish me. You can punish me. But in killing that woman, I also did another thing, that is killing of an evil, because they were representing evil. They were mortgaging things and squeezing people for the sake of interest. So in killing them, I killed evil also. So he problematizes that issue and he differentiates them. You can punish me for killing a man because a man is not supposed to kill another man or another woman. But a man has every right to kill an evil. So you can punish me for that, but you cannot punish me for this. So these kind of problematic and uncommon issues are there in the literature, and such kind of literature stands the test of the time. That is why Corona is a kind of uncommon situation, and we can easily imagine that will inspire or that will stand as a source for a lot of literature to be produced in almost all the languages of the world. So now what I am going to do at the moment is, here and there I will read certain passages or statements or quotations, bear with me. But on the whole, I would like to reflect, and this reflection cannot be like a narrative. I am not going to present a narrative of literature or COVID. I just want to reflect in a fragmentary manner. That is why I don't try to find a thread in my narrative. I just basically the presentation would be like this. I will just try to provide the context, and then the reasons for the emergence of this contest and the consequences. This would be the tentative structure of my presentation. Now, first of all, the corona changed the total human situations. Now, when calamities like this come onto the scene, we will understand the importance of what you call collective life. Because the first threat that was given by corona is fragmenting the society. The entire civil society is fragmented, and all the bonds among the people are broken. And we were worrying about the individualization process and process of isolation, process of alienation in earlier literature. But this is totally different. Individuals with all consciousness tried to isolate them. And it is like living in intensive care units. Everyone constructed an intensive care unit in their homes and started living in them. So this kind of self-isolation disturbed people in many ways. Because long ago Aristotle said the social animal man cannot exist in a confined situation. Because as Aristotle said, only gods and animals live in isolation, live individually. Man has to live in collectively. That collective existence has been shattered. And that is not a simple thing, but it touches the very core of what you call the human existence. And at the same time, the people drew inspiration for their daily survival in the interaction, in day-to-day interaction. And in Europe there are penal systems which are called isolation cells. Isolation cells are solitary confinements. In the solitary confinement, what they do, they will take a prison of 10 acres or 100 acres and leave only one individual in that. That is the severest punishment. The severest punishment than the capital punishment. In capital punishment, they kill you in an instant. But this solitary confinement or isolation cell is a cell or is a confinement where individually dies in a year or so. So such a kind of situation has been provided or has been created by this pandemic corona. And humanity has its responsibility. Because as we say in normal terms, when a man did something wrong, and that will have consequences. And corona also a kind of a consequence to the human actions. So the human animal, I use deliberately the expression human animal. At least we have to start using these kind of expressions, because we should not try to segregate ourselves from the rest of the species on earth. So the human animal became isolated and unable to live with the other people. And what is the use of or the advantage in interaction? Because when you meet people, not everyone, most of the people, you will get some kind of inspiration, some kind of consolation, some kind of reason for your existence. But unreasonable or irrational existence is not at all an existence. It is existence, but it is not a meaningful existence. So we can lead a meaningful existence only when you are associated with the people, you feel the conversation with them, you involve in a dialogue with them, or even you touch them. Touch is there are so many books recently published on touch. Touch is the ultimate aspect that brings you very closer to any human beings. And Keats in one of his poems says, touch has memory. Touch has memory. There is a guru now, Sadguru, some Jaggi Vasudev. He is using frequently an expression called water has memory. But I don't believe it, but the touch has memory for human beings. You cannot forget it. So the shake hand or the touch, most of the people, particularly I have seen in Rayalaseema, they won't speak without touching you, without coming closer to you. So this kind of touch has been removed from the human affairs. So that is why we are living a kind of life which is segregated, which is isolated, which is confined, and which is against the very spirit of human existence. And here, touch is a kind of paradoxical situation. Just for the sake of interest, I will cite an example from a book written by a lady by name Kitty Acton. There is a sentence, I will read it. Just listen. She is a woman, remember. I felt that if he touched me, I would die. I felt that if he touched me, I would die. And then thought crawled into my brain, and thought crawled into my brain that if he did not touch me, I would die. So in either case, it is equated with death. So that is the extent of the importance of the touch. Touch need not mean in any sexual connotation. It is in a normal human warmth. When a man wants to be too intimate with the other, he touches. And that kind of opportunity has been deprived by this kind of situation. It is only one example. So many incidents are there. You cannot interact with your mother properly. You cannot interact with your brother. You cannot share things with your neighbor. You cannot share coffee with your friend. Simply, you are taken away everything from your life and you are reduced to a kind of object living with life by staying in isolation. So this kind of situation naturally motivates people for various kinds of reflection. So people started reflecting. A lot of philosophical writings came onto the scene by these reflections. And the reflections, most of them, are finding fault with the modernity. That is the bone of contention, which I am going to show at the moment. Finding fault with the modernity. And what is the problem with the modernity? Many theories now, even long ago, identify the human crisis or the crisis that humanity is facing at the moment is the result of modernity and modernist project. And when was modernity? And you can stretch it to the Renaissance humanism. And in 1960s, throughout the Western world, there was a concept called anti-humanism. What is anti-humanism? It doesn't mean that I am against the human beings, but against the humanist spirit. What is that humanist spirit? The humanist spirit is one which segregates man from other species on earth. And it establishes a kind of legitimacy of human being and a deprived situation to non-human beings on the earth. So this type of humanism that has been emphasized, where the man, Heraclitus long ago in Greek society declared that man is a measure of everything. And this is the idea that inspired entire the humanist philosophy, which inspired a number of others in 15th and 16th century. Even today, there are others who are inspired by that humanist spirit. That humanist spirit places man as measure of everything. What does it mean? Man is the measure of everything. Because everything you have to discuss in relation to man, for the advantage of man, for the benefit of man. If something is not for the benefit of man, it can be discarded, it can be denigrated, it can be denied, it can be condemned. So man became an epic center in the entire universe because of this modernist thought that has its root in the 15th century. So a recent thinker like Bhikkhu Parekh, in a book on Gandhi, mentions this. Just I read it, bear with me. Modern civilization neglected the soul, privileged the body, misunderstood the nature and its limitations of reason, and had no appreciation of the individual nature, a person's psychological and moral constitution. Since modern civilization was only propelled by search for profit, it mechanized production without any regard for the wider moral, cultural, and other consequences. Modern economic life followed an inexorable momentum of its own without any being in charge of it. It reduced human beings to helpless and passive spectators and represented a new form of slavery. In almost all the modernist discourses, there is a kind of eulogization, glorification of a modern spirit. Even a thinker, and a progressive thinker like Karl Marx, eulogized the growth of modernity in his manifesto, Communist Manifesto, and other writings. So ultimately, what are we? We are reduced to slaves, like slaves to machine. And there is no one to control things. There is no one in charge of things. And everybody is dictated by the onslaught of the modernist process, propelled by profit only. Karl Marx beautifully in one of his writings says, capitalism that traveled along with the modernity, in a capitalist society, a capitalist is so greedy, where he sells the rope that hangs him. To put it in a simple terms, if you go to a capitalist and ask him, I want to hang you, immediately the capitalist asks you, sir, you need a rope to hang me. Please don't buy that rope with anybody. You buy it with me. That is the extent of a greedy attitude of a capitalist in a contemporary society. So the money became criteria for everything. I can cite a number of examples. All human wants are influenced by the money. Money became the criteria for judging everything. There are no relations, either mother, father, brother, or sister, wife, and husband. Everywhere, the money is the deciding principle. This love for money has been given as a value in the modernist philosophy. Writers like Tolstoy emphasized in 19th century itself that there should not be any kind of individual property. The individual element should not be there. But we did not listen. We craved for money, and capitalism perpetuated it. And because of this modernist spirit, traveled along with the capitalistic social structures, people are reduced to just slaves to money. And actually, when in the Middle Ages, all human beings were living in a kind of uncertainty. Uncertainty created by natural situations, natural surroundings. When there was a cyclone, when there was a tempest, when there was a natural calamity, when there was a downpour of heavy rains, and when there were cyclones, when there were avalanches, when there were a number of natural calamities, people were unable to understand the reasons. The reason was so simple. Earth was trying just to adjust itself. In the process, it is creating tsunamis or these avalanches or these cyclones or whatever it is. So people are afraid of them only. But modernity came onto the scene with a promise that it will take away all of them and it will correct the nature, remember the word, it will correct the nature and bring normalcy to the society and keep the man in a kind of a heaven. It is a kind of a Faustian promise. And you know that Dr. Faustus, Marlowe's drama, where Marlowe, the Faustus is promised by Mephistopheles with a number of benefits, but ultimately with his life he has to repay that. He has to repay that. So the common man at the moment, the man at the moment is in a kind of a Faustian situation where we have sacrificed everything, we have mortgaged everything for our survival. Ultimately, that decision transformed us into a kind of objects without any kind of regard for anything, and there is no security now. Uncertainty, freedom from fear, freedom from ambiguity. These are the three important promises made by the modernity from 14th or 15th century onwards. But ultimately, man is not having them. Moreover, he has to face a number of problems with regard to his survival. So here, problems like earthquakes, problem like floods, cyclones, terrorist attacks, blow up of petroleum wells, polluted water, and collapse of stock market, landslides, tsunamis, heat waves, droughts, nuclear disasters, chemical disasters, biological disasters. So instead of taking away the calamities that were affecting the human life, that were threatening human life, a number of new problems are created by the modernity. So that is why, in the process of respecting the benefits that we are getting, the modernist project ultimately destroyed nature like everything. So actually, the roots for this kind of crisis at the moment can be seen around the 16th century in Europe, because we have to blame for many of these things the Europe only, because this modernist thought emerged in Europe. That doesn't mean in Eastern countries we don't have modernist projects or modernity efforts, but modernizing efforts. They are different. They are organic. They try to emerge from the context and try to improve things. But the modernist project is totally different from that. It is not organic. It is imposed. It is not a natural growth. Anything that comes artificially will certainly create problems. That is what we are experiencing at the moment. So the roots are there around 16th century. I will cite an example. An earthquake called in sociology, very popular, that one, Lisbon earthquake. This is the place where the modernist thought began. In a city, Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, around 1570s or so, 75 or so, there was a huge earthquake on a festival day. And people in thousands gathered in churches. And there was immediately an earthquake at around 10:30 in the morning. After 3 hours, there was a tsunami. And after 3 hours, there was another tsunami. Because of this, thousands of people were killed. On one day, 75,000 are killed. Some people died in water, some people died in church buildings, some people died in fire, and almost majority of the people in the city are destroyed because of that natural calamity. On that day, philosophers which are put in a school called Enlightenment, ranging from Voltaire to Condorcet, all of them contemplated and they took a decision, individually decision, that nature has to be corrected. The nature has to be corrected. Unless we bring this nature into control, humanity cannot live in peace. So these earthquakes, these tsunamis, these natural calamities should be controlled, and it is like taking a decision to teach a lesson to nature. That was a futile attempt, but they started and they generated a lot of philosophical text in just supporting that. And ultimately, what happened? That idea inspired so many philosophers. But even after 500 years, where are we now? Are we secured? Are we safe? Are we safe from the social calamities or natural calamities? No. The human being is not at all safe. There are so many new threats added to the natural threats. Humanity, if you say from, if you look at the entire human history, you will find the deaths by natural calamities are less in number than the deaths that occurred in the later calamities created by the humans in the name of correcting nature or improving the society or improving the science or improving the medical sciences. They are more in number. Can you imagine the people that died in two world wars, First World War and Second World War, are more in number than all the people that died in all the wars that took place since the dawn of humanity and society. So in this way, even after 500 years, there is a writer by name Zygmunt Bauman, a Polish philosopher and sociologist. He published recently a series of books, like with the first book, Liquid Modernity. Later he wrote Liquid Love, Liquid Times, Liquid Surveillance, a series of books. In all of them, he said that even after 500 years, we are not safe. And our life or our existence became more dangerous because of the modernist precepts that influenced our living. And when AIDS erupted, in Europe particularly, there was a French philosopher by name Jean Baudrillard. He is a very radical philosopher. He said, AIDS is the vengeance of nature on man that did not care for it. It's the vengeance of it. It's a quality. I still say vengeance is a human quality. And we should not attribute to nature. But still, some kind of signal, as the president of UNA said, United Nations said, it is a kind of signal. It is a kind of warning given by, AIDS is a kind of warning given by nature, where there are so many perversions, quote and unquote. So whatever it may be, even after 500 years, as Bauman says, we are not safe. I quote a statement given by Bauman. 5 centuries later, towards standing at the other end of the huge graveyard of dashed hopes, ours is again a time of fears. A time of fears. Earlier, we were worried of the natural calamities. Later, we were worried of the artificial calamities like Chernobyl, like nuclear bombs, like atom bombs. But now, we are worried of other human beings. We are worried of the fellow human beings. We have seen, we have experienced during Corona time, when somebody knocks our door, we are disturbed. Maybe a short span of time. When somebody knocked our door, a vegetable vendor or milk vendor knocked our door, we used to shout at him because we were not ready to withstand the danger that he might bring. So the human beings are forced in such a level where they started hating the fellow being. The construction of other has been there from the dawn of civilization, or in the modernity, because we wanted to segregate other beings and consider them other as other, and we the self and the other, and we deny everything that we have for him or for her. That kind of a process is there. But this othering process began with the corona is more inhuman than the earlier things. So this kind of othering process and the binary between nature and humans all began, according to Jacques Derrida, with Plato, the in a way father of Western philosophy. In a way, the father of Western philosophy. I just moved to him a little bit. You know that Plato did not write anything, but there are many books in his name. And all of them are not written by him, recorded by his student. Because Plato said that writing is a bastardization of speech. For him, writing is a bastardization of speech. Why? Because it is twice removed from reality. Here is an object called chair. And this object chair is here, and I am here. I am looking at it. I am getting an idea with regard to that chair. The chair is there. I am using an expression chair. That is, once it is removed from the object chair. And if again I write, I think chair and write chair on a paper, then second time it is removed. Then it is not real chair. The chair that is written by me is not real chair. It is a distorted one. So I don't write. I don't accept writing. If you write, you are writing, you are bastardizing the speech. That is why I did not write. He only gave lectures and they are recorded. Later they are published in his name. So what is the problem with that? Because for him, speech is primary, writing is secondary. So he wanted to define the writing from the perspective of the speech. So he made writing as center and speech as center and writing as the other. So he defined from placing speech on high pedestal and writing on the low pedestal. This imbalance he has created resulted in the entire Western philosophy. You see, man and nature. You put man first and nature next. The man and woman, man first, woman next. That west and the east, west and the east. Likewise, there are hundreds of binaries we can identify. This is not a simple thing to take it as a natural phenomenon. No, it has a clear-cut philosophical insight in it, or in philosophical position in it, and that position is denigrating the other, or segregating the other, or marginalizing the other. So this thought of Plato influenced the entire Western metaphysics or philosophy, and they started making everything into two categories, like man, woman. That we normally say woman is weak. No woman say that a woman is weak. Only men will say woman is weak. Because I define thinking that I am strong and she is weak. So all the definitions are like that. But the danger or the relevant concept at the moment is we brought this kind of binary division even in the case of man and nature. So why nature? Man is the other to nature. Nature is the other to man. Man is the self and nature is the other. So why nature is there? Nature is there for the benefit of man. So nature is an object. Nature is the receiver. Nature is the giver and man is the taker. So ultimately, we try to establish our domination on nature. So the entire Western philosophy, recently the Eastern philosophy also, from Plato to the contemporary times, aimed at establishing human domination on nature. So nature has been reduced to the level of an object. What is the use of an object? Now you take use and throw glass, and you take water and you throw it away. And like that nature has been treated. So nature is there only for the benefit of humanity. This kind of logic has been developed by the entire Western philosophy, and that influenced the entire human thinking even in the Eastern countries. This binary thought, that is division between man and nature, is ultimately one of the major reasons for the emergence of the diseases like the pandemics like corona or any other virus related. Because everywhere we are neglecting nature, everywhere we are thinking we are the only species on earth. There are no other species, there are no other beings. So every object or every element in the nature is for the benefit of humanity. That is not acceptable. And since we accepted it, and since we practiced it, and we neglected nature, and we reduced nature as an object, and all the philosophy, if you observe closely, aimed at establishing the human domination on nature, and this is one of the consequences. If you go into the Western precepts relating to modernity and the modern philosophy, they say that man is human being is the source of meaning and value. If you want to say something, whether something is useful or not, you have to take man as the measure. Man as the measure. And nature is only valued as a useful object to humans, right? For example, we are living in a very remote area, Kuppam. When we joined this university, there are so many hills surrounded. Now, unless we remember that, we don't think that there are hills. There are hills. They are just dismantled like anything, and they are like ground zero now. And why? Because for the sake of money, all this destruction took place, and it is still taking place. And here, the another problem is the knowledge or the authentic source of knowledge can be attributed only to reason. Only to reason. Reason has been made as a god in the entire modernist project. And what is reason? Reason is a very, very problematic expression, problematic word. And what is reasonable for me need not be reasonable for you. Eating food with a hand is very reasonable in Eastern countries. Eating food with the hand is awkward in Western countries. So that is their reason, this is our reason, you cannot equate them. That is why you cannot generalize reason. But generalizing reason at the cost of emotion is the basic problem. There is a philosopher by name Descartes. One day he went to a mountain range. He was roaming. And on that day, you could not find anyone on that mountain, in that mountain range. He was the only person. To his shock, he could not find even birds there on that day. After some time, he got doubt. The doubt was whether he was there or not. Because if I have any doubt, I ask my colleague whether I am there or not. I will say that you are very much there, and I will say that you are very much there. But there is no one. He was the only person there. So he got doubt and he was unable to get the answer. He thought and thought and thought and thought. Ultimately was disturbed like anything. And after a lot of time, he got an idea. What I have been doing since this morning, I have been thinking whether I am there or not. So who is thinking? It's me who is thinking. It's me. So I am thinking. So the thinking is possible. It is not possible without I am there. So since I am thinking, I am there, he said. So how can I prove my existence? I think, therefore I am. So if I don't think, I am not there, because I will be reduced to an object. Since I think, I am there. And here is the question. And your thinking is a rational faculty. Thinking is you think rationally, or you try to think rationally, and you think in language. So it is a language that confirms your existence. So in that way he said, I think, therefore I am. If you do not think, you are not there. That is a kind of logic which has nothing to do at the moment. But the problem he has created is that he denigrated, he doubted everything except reason, and he doubted the emotion. The emotion. In emotion, there is no reason. You cannot attribute, there cannot be any reasonable emotion. You can logically say it is, but logically emotions do not know reason. So here, only reason has been highlighted and emotion has been denigrated. And if anything is emotional, I will cite one example how the reason and emotional class can be proved. If you go to a doctor, particularly in coastal Andhra, from Tirupati onwards, if you go to a doctor in midsummer, many people go to doctor or consult doctor, not now earlier, I don't know what is happening now. They put a problem before the doctor, the problem of heat in the body. Heat in the body. They suffer. There will be some kind of itching sensation when they urinate. That is heat. The moment you go to the doctor, you will shout at you, hey, you don't say what is heat. Heat is not there. The body has a mechanism to control. So don't say heat. There is no such thing as heat. But he is experiencing it. He is experiencing it, but this our medical doctor won't accept it. Because it is a kind of superstition for him, because it doesn't fit in the rational argument. I can cite a number of examples like this. For example, there were so many snake deaths earlier, deaths because of snake bite. And there was a man around Nellore or Ongole, by name Narsaya. Those who are elders can remember his name. Pamula Narsaya, his name was Pamula Narsaya. Whenever there was a snake bite, the person was taken by the parents not to the doctor but to the telephone booth. At the telephone booth, they used to make this man bitten by snake to speak with that Narsaya. That Narsaya used to chant some kind of mantras or nonsensical words in the phone. This man used to listen them and he is cured. That mantra cured him. Thousands of people in coastal Andhra are saved by it for a long time by that Narsaya. How? There is no miracle. There is nothing except that emotional element, that that irrational quote unquote element. What is that? Many people, the recent research proves that many people in India, 80%, not many, 80% of the people in India are dying because of a snake bite, are not really dying because of poison. They are dying because of heart attacks. So, when Narsaya spoke through the phone to the person, he was given confidence. That was the medicine. He was given confidence. I am there, I will take care of you, don't worry. Like that, he used to give confidence. But this element is not acceptable to the medical sciences because this is emotional. It cannot be fit in the rational argument or rational medical system. That faith itself is a medicine. That belief itself is a medicine. That courage itself is a medicine. If you go to the corporate hospital, the first thing they do is they just dehumanize you. They terrorize you. And they create a kind of fear in you. That fear is the major thing that helps in your death, as it happened in the case of snake bites. So whatever it may be, here the Western rational argument and this emotional, they created a kind of binary. In fact, they are supplementary to one another, that by the binary they segregated, an emotional element lost its space in the entire modernist discourse. That is why they condemned superstitions, they condemned dogmas, and they condemned everything. And they also said that the entire human history is progressive. History is moving towards progress. I had a professor when I was in Goa University for some time, by name Professor Kulakarni. He always used to say, these Wright brothers wrongly invented aeroplane. The Wright brothers wrongly invented aeroplane, and used to say another expression, the invention of the wheel is the reason for so many calamities. When the wheel was not there, there was no vehicle, there was no cart, there was no bullock cart or even aeroplane. People used to confine to their homes, they used to lead a kind of life. So in sociology also, there is a kind of group which is the anti-wheel group. They oppose the mechanization. That is extreme. But still, there is some sense in those arguments, and all of them are condemned as superstitious. So again, the rational element or the rational logic has resulted in creating a number of problems, because human being most of the time motivated by the emotion. In the binary created by the Western logic, emotion has been suppressed, reason dominated, and the humans have no say, and they became the creatures of self-perpetuation. Their own survival is important for them, and the death of other man, other species, or the destruction of other thing is not at all matter to them. And that is why there is a philosopher by name Marshall Berman, who wrote an excellent book, All That Is Solid Melts into the Air. He says, what is to be modern? To be modern is to find ourselves in an environment that promises adventure, power, joy, growth, and transformations of ourselves and the world, and at the same time that threatens to destroy everything we have, everything we know, everything we are. Because of this modern precepts and modern ideology, the entire human civilizations, which have distinct identities, lost their identities, they transformed themselves as per the conventions of the West, as per the conventions of the Western region. And another philosopher by name David Ho says, modern was nothing more than a vital energy, the will to live and to power, swimming in a sea of disorder, anarchy, destruction, individual alienation, and despair. This is a modernity. Individual has no existence of his own. He has to be eternally living in a kind of a disturbed life, and there is no peace in it. There are people who are finding so many ways to find peace in a modern society. Millionaires, the millionaires who are trying to find peace are unable to find because they are still living in that logical structure. They still maintain a kind of a faith. Faith emphasized by reason, not faith in normal term. Faith emphasized by reason. And the reason again for this is too much belief in scientism. There are so many works against these kind of scientific arguments. There is a name by name Paul Feyerabend, an European philosopher. He says that science kills alternatives. That doesn't mean he is opposing science. Science kills alternative. As I told, with the advent of allopathy, all normal natural medicinal systems, when somebody has some problem, he used to ask to stand in sun for some time and he is cured. But now if you go to a dermatologist, he will conduct all the tests and he will charge the maximum amount and he will squeeze you. So there is no natural remedy at all. So everything we started believing in science and it killed alternatives. You take the entire South India, a number of people in Andhra, Karnataka and Tamil Nadu go to allopathic hospitals, whereas many people in Kerala go to Ayurvedic hospitals. And there are diseases are number of diseases is less, whereas here the number is more. So they did not allow natural remedies for anything. They emphasize on this scientific, so-called scientific remedies. And science is impossible. Actually, science considers all the knowledge systems outside science as superstitious. That is not correct. Nietzsche, the great German philosopher, in one of his books called Gay Science, he says that without witchcraft and without witches, the modern science and modern medicine would not have been possible. Because witchcraft has also some scientific base. Witches tried to find a solace, find a solution for the problem faced by that so-called madman or madwoman. So it originated with an aim to find a kind of medicine. That is why it cannot be denigrated, it cannot be denied, it cannot be segregated or marginalized. But modern science emphasizes only on that. But ultimately, one of the problems that we are encountering at the moment, you see, there are so many people who are dying, and there are not even a single scientist who could provide immediately a kind of medicine for this disease, for this corona or other thing. They are trying, no doubt. But it is not a magic. Medicine is not a magic, but they project as if it is a kind of a magic. But ultimately, we should have to suspect science also. That doesn't mean we should respect irrational thought. That there is a kind of rationality, even irrationality. That is why Richard Rorty, an American philosopher, says like this. Here he is downtoning the chauvinism of science. Great scientists invent descriptions of the world which are useful for purposes predicting and controlling what happens, just as poets and political theorists invent other descriptions of it for other purposes. There is universe. As a scientist, you reflect on that. As an individual, I also reflect on that. My reflection may be dominated by emotion. Your reflection might have been dominated by reason, but both must be supplemented. If you segregate my emotion and you try to impose your logical argument, it is not sufficient. It is only a partial system. That is why, like poets, like politicians or political theorists who try to understand the society from a specific purpose, should also be taken into consideration, not simply the scientific argument. So, what is happening in science? Because what science says is not ultimate truth. What Newton said is disproved by Einstein. What Einstein said is contradicted by Niels Bohr. So, a series of scientific paradigms from the dawn of human civilization to the present are emerging. Not any single scientific principle stood there as ultimate or absolute principle. They are changing. We believed for long that the universe is operating on absolute rules and absolute principles. But Einstein proved no, it is not operating on absolute rules, it is operating on the relative rules. So I am speaking by standing here, and I am exposing myself to you, my body, my front of my body. And if I take a turn, I am exposing myself to by my back of my body, not the front. But your position not changing. Only the change in my position is changing your position also. This is relative. So like that, there are no absolute laws, but science always tries to say it is absolute, it is not absolute. And Paul Feyerabend in the book Against Method challenges that there is not even a single scientific law which has been not contested for more than a century. More than a century. Every time a law has been constructed, they say all crows are black in color. That becomes a norm. And a biologist says that crows are black in color. That becomes a norm. And that becomes a rule. After some time, some mischievous fellow finds a crow which is white in color. Immediately, the scientific paradigm changes and they construct a sentence, crows are black and white in color. And later tomorrow, may somebody find a green crow and they say crows are multicolored. So in science, what is happening? Paradigms are changing. They are not static, they are not absolute. But the entire argument of science will always be like that of an absolute argument. This absolute ism in science must be questioned at the moment, at least after so many experiences. And in all the aspects, including philosophy and science, there is a kind of a concept called anthropomorphism. And making man as the center, I already told it, making man as the center and neglecting other human species. This is a kind of utilitarian attitude towards nature, towards humans particularly. So this utilitarian attitude, everything is judged basing on the use value, And there are objects which are having the metaphorical value also. Somebody has a mother, and mother died, and mother is no more. And somebody takes a photograph of the mother and keeps in front of him. And that photograph provides him some kind of consolation. It is not mother. It is only a symbolic mother, a metaphorical mother. But still, it is a mother to him. You cannot deny this emotional aspect. Since you said that mother is not there, her body is not there, her presence is not there, why do you mischievously or foolishly pray this? You cannot challenge that. After all, it is an issue related to that individual emotion. So, this is one. Because of this utilitarian value, the society is infected with consumerism. There is a writer, I already told, Zygmunt Bauman, the Polish philosopher, wrote a book in 2008 or so. The title of book is Consuming Life. You are not consuming the objects, you are consuming life itself. That is a kind of argument he has developed, and the consumption became irresponsible. There is a kind of difference between primitive consumption and the contemporary consumption. In primitive consumption, there was no wastage. A man used to kill an animal and sit together with another friends and eat it and finish it and go. But the consumption at the moment is not like that. We are all victims to consumption because all our identities are constructed around consumption. If there is no identity, earlier I told, I think therefore I am. This sentence has been transformed. I consume therefore I am. If I have an identity because I think, but here it is not the identity that is given by me by thinking, to me by thinking. Rather, it is my consumption. Whether I have this car or that car, or whether I have this villa or that villa, whether I have an apartment in this area or that area, whether I am using this shoe or that shoe, this spectacle, this watch. So all the consumer objects are deciding the human life. So identities are asserted. I consume, therefore I am. This consumption resulted in a vast degradation of nature. I just cite one example here, the one sentence here. In the struggle for survival and development, man creates a lot of negative impact on the environment. These impacts ranges from over-exploitation of resources, destruction of ecosystems, and pollution. Often the exploitation of nature has been done in non-sustainable way, which is causing an increasing concern as the non-sustainable exploitation of natural resources ultimately threatens the human existence. Gandhi long ago said, Earth can provide to every man's need but not to every man's greed. Now we all became greedy because all our needs are not catered, rather we are striving to cater to our greeds. So this greediness ultimately exploiting natural resources. I told you, all the mountains around Kuppam are destroyed, they are dismantled, now they are ground zero, we are unable to see them. And it is not for human habitation, it is for the purpose of exporting. So you cannot grow mountains like trees, at least cutting of trees can be grown, but not mountains. And this is all because of the human greed. When you remove an area which is covered by a lot of plants, lot of birds and a lot of species of different varieties and the natural beauty, what happens? All this beauty is gone. Along with that, all the ecosystem and the life that is surviving on that is also lost. It will have its own reasons. It will have its own consequences. So we have seen so many videos when Corona was in a very in a very intense situation. So many animals came out. Somebody sent me from Banaras Hindu University a photograph where not less than 20 peacocks are playing on the road where every day there are so many vehicles are passing. So that beautiful situation has been removed. So ultimately, the issue at the moment is related to ethics. A philosopher Derrida, before his death, published a book titled The Animal That Therefore I Am. The Animal That Therefore I Am. I read something here, quote unquote. Speaking of the entire philosophical tradition, Derrida accuses it of having deliberately forgotten the animal and along with it very animality, you understand this, very animality of human beings. It is one thing, two things are here. One is because of our anthro-centered thinking, we are ignoring that there are other species like animals. We are asserting ourselves, and at the same time, we are forgetting the animality in us. We are even not in extension the fellow beings. There is in contemporary philosophy, they are not using the expression even animal. They are fellow beings. They are called fellow beings, not animals. But at the same time, if you attribute certain qualities to animals, the animals also, the man also has a kind of animality. If you want to give an example, the biological structure which we have inherited from apes, according to Darwin, is still is there. For example, we do not have tails now. There is a possibility of getting tails at any moment. Because that survival demands some object in our body, it will emerge. Many of you might have seen the film Waterworld. In the water world, the entire world is filled with water. And there is not even a single feet of land where a man can stand. Everyone has to live in water. By living in water continuously, what they do, they get some kind of arrangement at their ears so that they can get oxygen. Otherwise, they will die. So body has that kind of capacity to develop certain organs like other animals whenever the nature demands it, whenever not nature, surroundings demand it. But that we have forgotten that animality, we think that we are the ultimate beings on earth. Because of that, we are not taking care or not having any concern towards fellow species. And again, the recent researchers also prove that animals too have some kind of emotions and they have their behavior patterns, they have their own moral compass. They have their own moral compass. That is why denigration of animal is not acceptable. What the modern philosophy says is that there is a kind of binary between man and animal. And we can quote an example where they can act better than humans when a situation or the context provides an opportunity or provides a need. The studies related to tsunami that happened in most of the East Asian countries, many people died, but less a number of animals died.